The clock struck 7, and the younger light began putting away the Gemaras. It was the last day of a long winter's month, and they were taking home the seforim. Here and there, younger light were exchanging wishes with those who were going to their parents for Yom Tov. Within a few moments, everyone had left. Only Yaakov remained. Yaakov was busy taking all of his belongings out of the shelves. He was doing so at a snail's pace. At some point, he sat down and became deeply lost in thought. His eyes began misting, and the memories of more than a dozen years flooded his mind. He remembered his high school rebbe's shmuzin that had fired his imagination and passion to become a gadol. He remembered the stories about gedolim who did not seem to have any great abilities in the youth, yet through sheer willpower and tefillah became tremendous Talmid Chachamim. He had secretly promised himself that he would be that type of gadol. Yaakov winced at that memory. He remembered some great zmanim yeshiva and some rather dreary ones. Marriage, kolel, and now packing his bags for the last time.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Stark Tank, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. My name is Yaakov Wolf. Rav Aaron Lopiansky, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Greater Washington, wrote one of the most important resources for Bnei Torah in the workforce. It's a short sefer titled Ben Torah for Life. And the forward to the sefer, 2 short pages, captures the whirlwind of intense emotions that a Ben Yeshiva experiences as he stands on the threshold between Yeshiva and the world outside. The forward continues.
Rosh Yeshiva, actually the day after Pesach, he'd be sitting at a desk in his father's office, shuffling papers of some sort. Another balabas, nothing to write home about. Was he leaving because of finances, pressure, burnout, a sense of no accomplishment? All of the above. Powerful emotions surged up within him. I am a trader, the younger man who sold out his learning for an Nazir Dashim. I am the Ilfa whose heirs did not pick up Hashem's baskol to remain in learning. All of his many Rebbeim shmuzin began pounding away at him. And then there was a backlash. This is not what Klal Yisrael is supposed to look like. 90% of Klal Yisrael should be working. We have become a nation of schnorrers. I am fulfilling my responsibility to my family, the responsibility of the Ksuva. He began to doubt his Rebbeim. They meant well, but are naive. They're disconnected from the real world and just don't get it. He then was ashamed of his thoughts and said to himself, "You're just blaming other people for your shortcomings." He kept going back and forth from personal guilt to anger at those who had been guiding him till now. But worst of all was anticipating a bleak ruchnistic future. Visions of hurried perfunctory davening, catching a word here and there of Daf Hayom, and all too often nodding off, a gradual descent into a good life culture. It all depressed him. For so long he had seen himself as made of finer cloth, and now he'd be like the rest of them. This is a book for Yaakov.
If you haven't yet read the sefer, I can't recommend it highly enough. There's a link in the show notes for you to order it right now.
For over 25 years, I, Baruch Hashem, have had the privilege of being a Rebbe at Yeshiva Greater Washington, Tiferes Gedaliah in Silver Spring, Maryland. Our hundreds of graduates have gone in many directions, from Shiftu Veis Hashem to Rebbeim, Rabbanim, businessmen, physicians, lawyers, and everything else. It is a poignant moment when one of our Talmidim faces that final Seder. Countless times, we the Rebbeim have listened to the emotions just described, expressed with each Talmid's personal, nuanced feelings. It fills us with pride that Talmidim are not bolting out impatiently, but rather leaving somberly. We spend much time together mulling over the issues presented in this book. This book is dedicated to our hundreds of Talmidim, whose years in yeshiva sharpened and deepened my own learning, and whose post-yeshiva years continue to broaden my horizons of Teros Chaim, the Torah of life and living.
Today's episode with Rav Aaron Lopiansky has 2 parts. The first is a deeper dive into some of the central themes in the book. The second part is a Q&A with questions from the Stark Tank community members. If you would like to join our online community, all you have to do is click on the link in the show notes to join our quiet WhatsApp group. You will gain access to exclusive bonus content, invites to in-person events, and other perks, like being able to submit questions for future guests. This episode has been sponsored by Virtual Halacha Program. Hundreds of working professionals have found their path to sweet Torah learning. Check out vhalacha.com for more info. And now, here's our conversation with Rav Aaron Lopiansky. That introduction was so powerful, and when I read it, it moved me very, very deeply. And my question about it is that as the introduction makes mention that this is about emotions in a very, very central way. So how do we think about the discussion around emotions in our life? Because we're not necessarily talking about whether a person is doing mutter or usser. It could be that it's a completely 100% Ratzon Hashem to go out and work, and yet the emotions involved are so complex. So how do we start having the right conversations and framing them in the area of internal pneumistic emotions?
So I think understanding a certain, I guess, paradox about emotions is in place. Let's give an example. I unfortunately, my parents no longer alive. They would have been 100 plus. And when I think back, there's a lot of sad feelings, a lot of yearning, and so on. But I have to go on. Logic says, okay, they lived a full life, each one with their own things, and they passed away at an old age and have to move on. And that's the right thing. If somebody were to lay around depressed and just think about how he misses them, that would be something to be wrong. So we live with the emotion of feeling the emotions that we really feel attached, with the understanding that moving forward is the right thing, that letting go is the right thing. And so sometimes the emotions are appropriate, and dealing with it logically is appropriate, and they have to live together. It's a point that I really think, somebody had meant to construe my book about that yeshiva learning is not the only thing. The point is, every person's experience in yeshiva should have these powerful emotions. This means that it was real. And yet, and then I have to ask myself, what do I have to do? But it's a testimony. Hashem is perfect. There's a certain Kodesh Kadashim in the world that's perfect, and we need to keep our hearts there and our minds at what am I supposed to do now?
The book is a contribution to our specific generation and the specific challenges we face, and we are people who love to look back in the Masorah and feel connected to our Masorah. But the challenges we face today, as far as the massive bracha of yeshiva learning and the massive bracha of kolim all over the place, is very much unprecedented. Is there any historical precedent, any Mar Makomos that echoes such sentiments in any way, shape, or form that we can draw upon in these conversations? The book does take from here and there and finds relevant nuggets from across Chazal, but I'm wondering if there's anything in history that has any sort of relevance to this, or it's completely new territory in what we're experiencing.
It's hard. Listen, to speak about history, you have to claim to be a baki in each and every tkufa. I do. Something that comes to mind again. This is 100 years ago or a little more. Rav Hutner's father has a letter to him. Rav Hutner's father, I guess, must have been a very capable person, and yet he had to work. He was, I guess, it was business. I don't know what. And he expresses in one of his letters over there very powerful sentiments of how he feels trapped in what he's doing, and he can't be the person he would like to be. It's very powerful. There is a beautiful story from Rav Elia Kaplan, whose yahrzeit I think was yesterday. Not mistaken, 100 yahrzeit was yesterday. About he wrote. He was an extraordinarily multifaceted individual, Rav Elia, and he wrote stories. And one of the stories is about a young couple in Lita. He works as a Melamed, they're childless, and somewhere down deep, you begin to pick up a throb of, I know that I could be more. I wish I could be more. You have these things, but I don't find it common in eras before. I don't know, maybe people didn't write. There wasn't the autobiographies and stuff like that. It wasn't so common. And people who, there wasn't this cola life and semi-cola life and so on. You had very few people who really could sit and learn in a meaningful way. The handful of Rabbanim Rosh Yeshivas were Rabbanim Rosh Yeshivas. I'm not aware that a lot of the factors today in play could really. I don't think there was such an institution. The people who learned in Europe were the very few and they were very talented. They had money, different things. So I'm just not aware that this could have been a common problem at any time. Another point, maybe that's what's worth. We're not the only people in the world, believe it or not. And there are societies, for instance, there was a big Hungarian world, Oberlander specifically, I'm thinking of, where being a Torah balabas, knowledgeable Torah balabas, was a feeling of accomplishment. The idea of shifting Beis Hashem to exclusive everything wasn't the central feature. By Chassidim, it certainly wasn't. In Chassidim, the dveikus in the Rebbe, the slavas in the tefillah, that marked you as a shleimistic person. So even though a person might have thought maybe I could learn, but he didn't feel that he was missing out on life. The ethos of Torah and Kulei Torah is it. It's kind of a lot from the Goyen's Cheder and filtered down to yeshivas. So you had other societies that they could feel a certain shleimus as long as everything else was really working well.
What are the main, let me just say that this way. I really hope that anyone who's listening to this has already purchased and read the Rav Sefer a few times, and I know many of the listeners who are part of the community of this podcast have expressed the importance of it. So I'm not sure exactly what to assume here. I didn't say that well. I really hope that everyone who's listening to this podcast has already read Ben Torah for Life. I hope that anyone who hasn't will right now go and order it and read it. It's a fantastic work. So maybe just before I ask a specific question, maybe the Rosh Yeshiva could introduce the idea of the Shiftei Kaf framework that really lies at the heart of the beginning of the Sefer, and then there's something I want to discuss about that.
Right. So I think the first one is the struggle, and I think the emotional struggle that's portrayed, I think, becomes a logical struggle. So is it true that that there's a ranking, and if you didn't make it to Tiferes Hashem, is second rate, third rate, fourth rate, and so on? That's really so. It's like when someone tells me it's okay that you only earn X amount. Not everybody can be a millionaire. So the explanation, so the underlying understanding is being a millionaire is great. If you only have X amount of money, you can also make do and so on. So you're implying, and this is the problem. What I tried to explain was, Klal Yisrael is like a body, and in terms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Klal Yisrael in a way where there's a core brain, there's a heart, there are hands, there are feet, and what am I meant to do? However hashgacha and talents are. But so just like my hands need to do what hands do, and they can't sit and be misboning, they need to work and to pull and to push, but they need to take orders, so to speak, from the head. Understanding that the Yeshiva Gedolah is Am Hashem, and then I need to ask myself, where do I fit into it? If Hashem gave me the abilities to do X and not Y, then I'm questioning Hashem by pushing for Y as opposed to X. So I need to give the kavod, the maimed, by being mechabed. I'm talking about a genuine way. The person who is the kol kulei Torah, then I am saying that's my role to be part of that Indian.
The Rambam famously has a beautiful formulation of Shevet Levi and its role as the spiritual leaders of the Jewish people. On the other hand, in the Rambam Hilchos Talmud Torah, he seems to be talking to all of Klal Yisrael, and he says that the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is for everyone. And in Perek Gimel, Keser Torah is also for everyone. Even someone who's working could potentially be zocha to Kisra Shel Torah. So how do we understand that in the framework of the Shvatim and the Shevet Levi's place?
Right. So it's interesting. I always say that people quote selectively the Rambam depending on the affiliation. That people that point to Rambam are not allowed to take money for it, and so on and so forth. And it's some that quote the Rambam this, and everyone conveniently ignores. How do you reconcile the Rambam? So the truth is, the Rambam himself did. In his Pirush HaMishnayos, in Pirkei Avos, he speaks about it. And he fleshes it out. And his basic point is, if a person, his main peeve against taking money for learning was that it's b'derech tzedakah. Please help a poor Talmud Chacham, he's starving, he's hungry, just buy him a pair of shoes and so on. That he felt was very degrading, and it turns you into it's a degrading of Torah and Lomdeha. But he says, if you set up, and he gives two systems, he says, either there's a kavudek aktzava, like Trumas and Maisris, or you have, like it brings more by Rav, that nobody could sell whatever it was until he sold his stuff. So you give him a sort of monopoly on something, and that way he gets parnasa becovered, and yet doesn't waste time in learning. When people point out about the Rambam being a doctor and yet being the Rambam, they also conveniently forget the history, that when the Rambam was supported by his brother, Reb David, he was sitting and learning, and that's when he wrote his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah and Pirush HaMishnayos. His brother was a businessman. His brother died in the ocean. And once he became a doctor, not only did he have time to learn, when Ibn Tibbon sent him a question, he told him, I want to come discuss the work with you. He said, I just don't have time. I'm just torn apart by this. So the Rambam's, so the Rambam is, yes, he's speaking about Kisra Shel Torah. He also adds, and there's a point that people don't pay attention to, in Shemitah V'Yovelis, he says that it's Nodva Ruchai. There has to be some sort of inner sense of mission. I don't know what to call it exactly. It's not a halacha that you can dump on people. The halacha is, that it's vasafta ganecha. We pass like that. There are people who feel a nesias ruach, and that's so. There's another element there that for the person who has that sense, that's where he belongs.
So interesting, because we mentioned before the emotions, and you mentioned now the lashon of nadva rucho, and yet I think many of us struggle with the fact that there are so many social pressures and external image considerations with regards to all of our decisions. So does everybody have any advice or chizik on making sure that whatever it is that we're deciding to do is from a place of nadva rucho?
So, as if people pointed out correctly, but I always hate to sound like an old man. I was always the youngest boy on the block, so now I have the ability to be the old man. When I was growing up, sitting and learning, public opinion was so against it. I don't sense something. You're such a bright boy, and you're going to be a bar mitzvah boy teacher? What do you mean you're going to sit in cold? It's very, very nice. Who's going to be in front of your family? What are you talking about? I very chashva Rav told me, somebody, because he's old, he's like probably 8-9 years older than me. He told me that he grew up in the normal from track, and he went to Torvadas, which was as right wing in non-yeshivish as you could get, Hamish. He went to high school, and the norm in those days was you finished high school, you went to Brooklyn College at night and took accounting, and in the morning you got smicha, and that was it. And then you got smicha, and then you got your accounting degree, and you got married, and you were Erl Chadalbas. He went to Lakewood, this person, and he told me that he met a friend of his a few years later, and his friend in all sincerity told him, Yaakov, the person's name is Rabbi Yaakov, I really admire you, because we both know you're going to end up with a second or third grade girl. I mean, no normal girl is going to marry you. You know that, and I know that. But you're doing it because Torah is so important to you. Kol hakavod. Now, that was the public spirit in those days. It's incredible that it flipped the way it flipped. It's really unthinkable. So yes, people need, and that's why you need to have a person, Rebbe, that can tell you. And we have Talmidim that are sincere and good. Many of them want to become Rabbanim, Rebbeim, this and that. And it's come from a very good place. As the outsider, I feel some of them don't have the appropriate personal skills. It's not just that you're big master in learning. And it's part of my job to help say, listen, this is not, your heart's in the right place. You're amazing. It's just not the right thing. And having a personal Rebbe to help you navigate is so important. The problem is today yeshivas b'li har because they come so big. People don't even ask what yeshiva want to go to. Who will you have as rebbeim, personal rebbeim, and people that you can interact with? Nobody thinks about it. And when you make decisions like this, you want somebody who really knows you and understands what's driving you.
And I just want to move to the reception of the Sefer. I've heard from so many people who are working that they found tremendous chizuk and inspiration from the Sefer. And I'm wondering if there's anything, I mean, the Rav mentioned a little before, people wanted to misconstrue things and then fit things to their agenda, but anything that was surprising or unexpected, maybe not just in a malicious way, but in an interesting way about what the effects of the discourse and the impact of the Sefer was.
I mean, Baruch Hashem, I didn't. One person told me offhand, like an old Chava of mine from Yeshiva many years ago, said, "I don't agree fully." He never expanded and never expanded on that. Baruch Hashem, I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard anything negative, Baruch Hashem. Maybe there is, but Baruch Hashem, it didn't reach me. And I think for many people, the idea, I guess, again, I'm trying to navigate between the idea that it's not palliative care. In other words, the problem is the focus in Shivas of giving a transcription Torah is very positive. I wanted my children to have it. I want everyone to have it. That's very positive. But when you move on to the next stage and Shifty is not your lifetime thing, the idea that it's b'di'evet in the sense that it's palliative care, you're never going to amount to much anyway. And whatever you do, okay, is like, b'di'evet, might as well, that I think is a churban. Nobody takes musa. When you tell somebody, on the base of everything you did, you're going to Gehenim. But maybe the Gehenim will be a little bit less hot if you refrain from this Aveira. It doesn't work well. Most people say, I guess if I'm going to Gehenim anyway, I might as well live it up a little bit. That's the, but understanding all the factors that have put you where you are is Ashkacha. And there's no b'diavad, there's the chatchila. The chatchila meaning, today I woke up and I'm this situation, I have avodas Hashem wants from me. And someone pointed me out just recently, Rav Shanshval Hirsch, I think it's on Siddur on Krishma, I think that he speaks about it. I saw it very briefly, but he says something, Anisha Chafti Beishana Ketzaisi, he says, when I went to sleep, I didn't think, the Amel said that I have what it takes, schusim and so on and so forth, to continue. Why? I have so much baggage. But I woke up because you woke me up. You want me. The idea that every single person, if he is, it's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I have a avodah for you to do. And to treat it that way, it's so much more motivating when what you're doing is a chatchila and its accomplishment, then maybe you'll get that 1% not in, it doesn't, and I think that that's a very, very important nekuda that I think people found.
You mentioned the lechatchila in both areas, the beauty of being in yeshiva and the lechatchila of being beyond yeshiva. Sometimes I think back to my very first morning in yeshiva where I heard the word balabas used in like a derogatory way in the Beis Medrash. And when you think about that experience, maybe it's a little bit subconscious, but you're developing your ruchnius identity, you're in the Beis Medrash, and you hear balabatish or that's a balabatish thing to do. I'm wondering if anyone in Yeshiva Gedolah Washington uses that or if it's considered beyond the pale.
So it's hard. I have to think about. We usually try not to use derogatory terms. That's part of I don't think. But I want to explain where it comes from. Things have a history. I always say a still picture is never the truth. A video is much more true. And please don't misquote me and say that video is a good thing. I'm just explaining that there's a history. Again, let's go back to where I was growing up. And this is true, even this idea is even true in Europe. People's understanding of Torah was flat. I'm a good Jew. I come to the shul. I hear the rabbi's speech. We make a kiddush, we sing the Anim Zemiros. He teaches a wonderful lesson from the Torah. So on the one hand, here are people who are ignorant and they're very, very, and they sacrifice a lot, very admirable. But their understanding and their mindset and so on. I gave a VAD with the high school seniors, and I tell over something I once heard to demonstrate what the word balbatish and what the context is. A long time ago, this is going back probably 50 years ago, more, 53, 54 years ago, there was a man in the Mir. He was very sick. He got better. They made a Yeshiva Gedolah, and the people who helped in the hospital were there. So I was one of the boys. I was a young boy. It was my second year in Yeshiva probably. And it was a very chashuv Torah olam, very, very chashuv Torah. And a lot of, and this person was a chashuving man, and a lot of, so there was a Rosh Kollel there. Rabbi Sol Beer, I forgot his last name, this guy escaped me. He was a Neri Sol Talmud, had been a very long time by forgot he had a Kollel, and he raised the following question. He said, according to the Shitas, like Hanukkah, it was on Hanukkah, was the Mesiba, that the candles burnt and got extinguished when they went like 7/8 through, and then the next day they did it again, and the next day again. So according to those Shitas, how was it good to burn? It was Deshen. How could they do it? Deshen means anything that was Nikrav. Once it has a Shem Deshen, it can't be Nikrav. That was the question he posed for the Olam to answer. So there was a person there, American, they're safe of some sort, but not a. He said, he says maybe it's just a difficult matzah was thing around, so they used it. And this poor Sobel was like, but it's Deshen. And I said, yeah, but it wasn't as if they had the ability to get what they did. And it was like telling him use water instead of oil to burn. Deshen is Deshen. There was a certain sense of halacha being kind of a very, very superficial mind frame, and the idea that there's a whole different mindset. So that there was a sharp knife used to say, this is a type of seforim you use in the supermarket, not in Torah. You can't get the Starkist, you'll get the other one. You can't guess. It's two different mindsets. So there was a strong drive to you're being mechadish in a world of understandings, of approach to life, and so on. A lot of times that leads to sort of it also sometimes gets a little personal, gets a little bit over. So the term balabatish was meant to sort of be a sharp knife to say you've got to think differently. It's not just adding more terutzim. That was the approach, and of course it then leads to where you reject, and then when you have to make the transition, it becomes liability. So yes, there is something to it, but understand where it came from.
Okay. You made mention of your childhood a few different times in this conversation, and I once heard a very beautiful description of walks with your father when you were a kid, despite the fact that you weren't living in the most upscale neighborhood. So maybe if you could share that story, and then it seems so far from us in today's world.
So the story is my parents were Holocaust survivors. My father had a wife and children. He was a much older person. I assume that when I was born, he must have been in his 50s. The papers were always a bit, so my father was an extraordinary person, very warm, personable, soft-spoken, very unique. He was like a grandfatherly type figure in that way. And a lot of, so we lived very simply. We lived in Lower East Side, which was where everybody lived until they started making money and moving up outside. And we didn't have a TV, but so a lot of times after supper, my father would take us, me and my brother, we were just two of us, take us by our hand and go for a walk and schmooze. My father liked talking, describing life in Europe and things like that. And those are incredible moments. Just the companionship, attention, thoughtful conversation, and to me, that's when I think back of my childhood, that's what I think about. The walks I found. If I liked to walk, he was literally, we liked walking, strolling, and just the warmth and thoughtfulness and talking was that was growing up.
And does there have any advice about being able to recapture some of that simplicity in today's generation?
So, I hate to make grand pronouncements, but understanding that the time spent with children, doing things, talking about things, is the single best thing you can do with them. It doesn't make a difference how grand of a trip and a place they go to. I read from somebody an account, this was one of the Hebrew newspapers. He took his kids for a trip to Eretz Yisrael. He had 8, 9 kids by Hara. And after the trip, he asked them, what was the best part of the trip? And each one said something else. And it kind of stunned him. Like, how could it be everyone has? And then he looked for the common denominator, and he realized he had made up his mind that they would devote part of his time, he would take each kid, just himself, to a certain place. And that's the place that each kid remembered as being the best place. It's the time spent shut off from the world, not answering the phone, not looking at the phone, being quiet, talking and interacting with the child. When you talk with a child, when you're lecturing a child, then there's always resistance, because he's usually the subject of the lecture. So the subject tends to resist the lecture. But when you converse and explain why something is wrong, why you think something, this and that, he feels heard. I don't know. To me, that was the most educational part of it. So just giving the time, and let the child understand it's not where you're going to, it's who you're going with, and the interaction. And if you say, a quiet talk, a quiet stroll together to rejuvenate is the best thing we can do now.
Wow. That's a great segue. We have a listener named Morty from Mitzvah Yericho, and he actually asked the Rav about specific recommendations or ideas for limud with children. Time is often limited. There are times multiple children. There are boys. There are girls. So any other additional etzos and guidelines in that respect?
So I would say you should never be a child's tutor in the sense that you're teaching him the hard stuff, because inevitably it clashes and it's problematic. You want to pick something that is easy enough for the child to be able to do well without problems. It's depending on his child. Something, if the child picks it, even if it's not the 100% that you would have preferred, it's a milah. And preferably something where you can mark progress and say, we finished this, we learned that. I think those are three things that should be guidelines. I can't be more specific.
Okay. There's a listener named Yitzi from Chicago, and he asked about strategies for juggling all the different obligations of marriage, family, community, and professional, and just for learning and davening and zmanim. And I would maybe add to that question that this is not just a question for Balabatim, but I'm sure that Rosh Yeshiva have a tremendous amount of things on their plate. So I'm wondering if Rosh Yeshiva has any personal strategies for balancing time and commitments and energy between all the different things.
And also listen to podcasts. That's the most important part of it. So I would say the first thing is somewhere along people, Balamusa used to speak a lot about, make cheshbon nefesh and so on. I would say finding once a month, let's say like Shabbos Mevarchim, Motzei Shabbos Mevarchim, something like that, a time that is kavua but not overbearing, and spending a half hour, 20 minutes, prioritizing all the different obligations. What really needs to be, what doesn't. Generally speaking, things that need to be, even giving it some time. Lamarsh, let's give an example. Work on behalf of the community. The difference between doing something and nothing is infinite, because one is a statement, I couldn't care less about community. It's like tzedakah. If somebody comes and asks, and you give $5 and you say, this is what I can do, it's something. If I say no, I'm turning the person away. So that everything has a place and needs some time. That's so let them first write some things like I don't need, but so prioritize, and then ask what's incumbent upon me, what will happen without me, and giving and things never work on something like planned. But if we have a guidelines in our minds what we're doing, it helps get a much better feeling that we're in control of it.
Okay. During these challenging times, we all want to feel that we are part of the effort to defend Klal Yisrael. Is the idea of Torah Magid Umatzil limited to full-time Avrechim? What are the sources about the various flavors of Talmud Torah and how they contribute to the war effort? That's part one. And part two is the discourse in Eretz Yisrael around the army has caused some Gedolim to make statements that exclusively highlight the Torah of Avrechim, and that makes Baal Batim feel inferior. And so does the Rav have anything to say about this?
So in general, every Talmud Torah is extraordinary in what it helps. It's Talmud Torah is Talmud Torah, and Adrabah, there is the each type of Talmud Torah has its Maila. The people are Kol Torah, the people who find time to learn despite other difficulties. In public discourse, a lot of the statements are there because the general issues. I think paying less attention to what's splashed across headlines and being a mistake is important. People say things and people quote things and people, it's very little chachma comes out of headlines. I hate to say it. So it's a lot better. It's a lot more important that people say yes. Everything that they do is mechazik, and we believe that Torah is there. Maybe the fact that it didn't turn into catastrophe. Who knows? No one knows. The what if is the harder. And part of our firm belief in it is so it's definitely there's a chivas, a unique chivas to people who are able to learn even when there's so much pressure in other areas.
Ushe from Yerushalayim wants to know, as an Oleh from America, the ashkafos we grew up with are very different than the ones we encounter in Eretz Yisrael. This applies to everything from attitudes towards Bnei Torah in the workforce and academic degrees. How are we supposed to relate to this, and how are we supposed to raise our children in this conflicting environment without giving up on the ashkafos we personally value and want for our family? And Moshe pointed out this could obviously be relevant in many different areas where a person grew up in a certain ashkafa and finds himself living in an area where there's a different ashkafa. So he wants to hear what the Rav has to say about that.
So it is the biggest influence on your kids will be the community in the specific sense, the general sense, finding a community. Yeah, like I said, in the specific general sense that fits your hashkafa is critical. You can't raise a child that to be radically different than the surroundings. So you find what you feel is the best for you. In other words, it's like a suit. No suit fits perfectly off the rack, but which one is the tailoring easier and so on. And you can be machanech your kids. You should never contradict head on head the chinuch to receiving. You can't say, well, your Rebbe doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's crazy, or he's extreme, or he's whatever it is, because then you destroy everything. But you can add and say, we have a little bit of a different twist on that, yesh for yesh, something like this, something like that. So you can make minor adjustments to kids' chinuch in the way what they hear at home. It has a long-term effect. But finding a tzibur community that you feel comfortable in the big picture is vital.
Okay. Roshaya Klein from Manchester wrote in the following: I often hear from Baal Batim that they have tried many different shiurim, chaburas, programs, and yet they still haven't found their stride in learning. They find Torah to be too difficult or too boring or unstimulating. These are from nice people. What would the Rav say to such a person? Is there a concept of closing the books and channeling his avoda into different places?
So just like a person who finds it hard to daven, you don't tell them to close the siddur totally and not to daven. A person who is not a very, very geschikte person, so to stop doing chesed totally, to stop doing totally is wrong. Then it means that your formula is different. Talmud Torah must be part of it. You can try to distribute in smaller packages. You can try to, for some people, learning chavrusa works better. For some people, having one-on-one Rebbe. For some person, short, they have today a Mishnah Berurah podcast, 15 minutes, a Mishnah podcast. Learning 2 Mishnahs a day, I don't know, it takes probably 10 minutes or whatever they they have so many people teaching it. There's an amount that I think could work for everybody. And understanding there's no such thing as constructing a tzura of a yid that has zero Torah. You can adjust the different times, but not cutting it out.
Just to follow up on that, there is a psychological term called the paradox of choice, that having too many options can be paralyzing and even more challenging. So are we at a point where we are maybe afflicted with too many options with regards to the myriad of wonderful resources? They're all great, but a person tries to choose and then they're always doubting because maybe there's a better one and maybe there's a different one.
So what I would do is, especially this was asked by a Rav the Shail, I guess, somebody should be. Let's go back to the example. There used to be one cure for something. Today we have a wide range of antibiotics, sulfur drugs, etc., etc. But it's much more helpful when you walk in and you see so many choices. Like you say, the paradox of choices is challenging. But then you want a doctor to say, I think this will be, and it pushes you to do X, Y, or Z. A Rav should say to the person, I want you to try this for the next 3 months. These are our goals. This is the reason why I think it works. How are you doing? Check in and so on. So the person feels he's getting a tailor-made remedy, so to speak. And the fact that there's so many choices is amazing. So it allows the Rav, the rabbinic figure, to use these tools and yet not to feel like you point out rightfully this overwhelming choices.
Okay, this is the final question for today. We're excited for the Rav's next book about being a ben yeshiva, and we're wondering about the connection between the two books, and specifically how people who are post yeshiva should remember their times in yeshiva and how they can develop a healthy relationship with the part of yeshiva that lies inside them from the past.
So I think the way to look back at it in a healthy, positive way is, if a person learned well in yeshiva and remembers what it's like to sit to get into a sugya, be challenged by it tremendously, and work a night to figure out an answer to the kasha of Ketzos or a Kiveger, or to go over a shir of Reb Chaim or something like that. That memory, that part of himself, is him, and it continues to give life. So when I go out and I see all sorts of people in doing different stuff, I can say, this is shtusim ravolim. A cruise is not where it's at. This is not where it's at. That's not where it's at. It's somewhere else. I'll if you have a minute or two, I'll tell you a memory I have. I used to learn with Reb Nachum Chavrusa. It wasn't my schus so much. It was I was learning with his son Chavrusa, and then Reb Nachum had Chavrusa at night, in the morning. So this was the afternoon. We in the early afternoon we had a Chavrusa for an hour or whatever it was. This was for 1 year. There was an elderly Rav from America who had come and retired in Israel. He was one of those type of people who would sort of have pictures of all the presidents and popes that he's met. He was like a very public figure, very, kind of all over the place. He came, he didn't have much to do. He knew, I think, the Pine whatever. So he would learn an hour a week with Reb Nachum. So his hour was supposed to start on Tuesdays after we finished. Then he started coming 5 minutes early, 10 minutes early. But he finally came a quarter of an hour earlier. Reb Nachum looked at his watch and he said basically, so the person caught the remes, and he said, Reb Nachum, let me tell you something. Reb Nachum's apartment was a basement, literally a basement, and the Haga had declared it fit for miklat. That's how basementy it was. It was 3 rooms. It was with some unfinished stones left from the building. I can't explain to you how posh this is. He said, Reb Nachum, let me tell you a story. He said there was once a balagola who traveled far and wide, and he came back home after Shachris. He gave a big clap, and he said, Rabbi Sai, I've traveled the entire world. But it doesn't suck it. And there is nothing like this base medrash. So you'll say, who says it? Yankel, the wagon driver? The great statesman Bilam said, Matoiva lecha Yaakov v'shazech Yisrael. That Reb Nachum, I've been everywhere. There is nothing in the world like these 4 walls over here. A person needs to carry that, and he'll see big and great and important and this and that, and say, it's all nice and fine. There is nothing like Meruba. There's nothing like a morale. There's nothing like this. There's nothing like that. And those are the hagashas that this is who you are. Everything else is the environment you function in, and that's what you take with you.
Rav Lopiansky, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today. This was tremendous chizuk and inspiration.
Okay,
And
very nice speaking with you. And Bez Hashem, and we should our door should do what I think it's a challenge of our door, Bez Hashem, and Bez Hashem we'll do what we're supposed to do, Mr. Hashem.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to Stark Tank. Please take 10 seconds to help us grow the show by leaving a 5-star review and hitting the subscribe button. Until next time, keep on steiging, Chevra.